Welcome to Connect. I'm Rachel Anne Goodman. Today we're having a conversation about connection in a divided world. It might seem like people are just always on the opposite sides these days, having trouble at Thanksgiving dinners talking about anything political. But the people we're talking to today have figured out a way to talk to each other, even though they disagreed vehemently on some things. So welcome to a conversation about connection. Rick Longinotti, Mike Rotkin, thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting us.
Welcome.
This is a different kind of an interview than I've done, because often we talk about problems and where people disagree and debate. We're not going to talk about that this time. We're going to talk about where we connect, even though we sometimes disagree. And just to start out the conversation, I'd like to talk to each of you about your background as an activist. Both of you identify yourselves that way. Mike Rotkin has been inside politics as an elected official. Rick has been on lots of commissions and very active in transportation and housing and water and all these other areas. Tell me a little bit about each of your journeys along the path as activists first, and then we'll talk about where you butted heads a little bit later.
Right. Yeah, I come from a family who's not terribly activist, but it was the times, really. I graduated high school from a Catholic high school in 1970 when Nixon had just invaded Cambodia. And there were some of my fellow classmates who wore black armbands at the graduation. I remember that year. I decided not to. I didn't want to upset my parents. But within the next couple years, I was writing a letter to my sister saying, she lived on the East Coast. She was going to vote for Richard Nixon for re-election in 1972. And I wrote her a note saying, how could you? Vote for this man who I thought was a war criminal, and then I enumerated a lot of his crimes, right? So from early on, I was an activist, but also a pretty self-righteous one. In fact, when she wrote me back a letter saying, how could you be so self-righteous, So right then, I got the feedback like something wasn't working in my communication, and so I, spent another few decades trying to figure that out. But I did identify as an activist. In college it seemed like it was the young people who were really vocalizing like something's seriously wrong here with the war. And it seemed like we had an inordinate amount of responsibility to vocalize because it wasn't coming from the higher ups or the older folks. So that's the way it felt to me anyway. And then after college I got involved with the United Farm Workers Union, which was kind of a great place to learn about organizing, planning to unlearn there too, longer conversation. And then, when I had a family with 2 kids, pretty rapidly realized I couldn't be an activist anymore. And I went to work and was a dad, and that's what I did. And at one point during the 90s, I was inspired by the fact that we had just another war with President Bush Sr. taking us into war in the Gulf over oil. And I thought, well, I'm contributing to that, in my consumption patterns, and see if I can cut back my consumption a little bit. So I decided to do my business, electrical contracting business, with a bicycle and trailer. So I gave away the van and started working with bike and trailer. And actually people hired me because they see my name on the back of the trailer, and so that was it for a while, but until time freed up for me to be able to get back into being part of the community activism.
And what do you think the common denominator, the feeling was all along that motivated you into being an activist? Some people look and feel a lot of feelings, but they don't do anything. What's the difference between the person who feels and makes some sort of decision not to engage and someone like yourself?
Yeah, I think that, as it turned out, even though my family was, had their own sort of slow evolution about learning what the Vietnam War was about, Catholic family thought this was a war to, against the anti-Catholics, or, but we thought the communists were anti-Catholic, right? So we were kind of slow in arriving at figuring out what was really going on there, but still we had within our tradition, the kind of social justice sort of ethics, and so that helped. But also, I think, a feeling of empowerment that something that we could do would actually make a difference. And I got that with the United Farm Workers Union because they were successful during the period that I was there, and I could see, you know, our work, you know, having a payoff. So I think that's, I look around now and I see that a lot of folks are really effective, but not everybody feels very empowered. So I think that's probably an important ingredient.
Good that we're having this conversation now then, so people on the fence thinking, what can I do, that maybe will think about how they might engage in some way. And how about you, Mike?
Well, I grew up in a household with activist parents. Both my mother and my father were active in the community. They put together a cooperative swimming pool. We lived in a rural neighborhood that didn't have any swimming pool, and they put together 250 families and working people who didn't have a lot of money, and showed that you could build an Olympic-sized swimming pool with enough people contributing to it. There was a mimeograph machine on my dining room table. We were always doing civil rights stuff of one kind or another. And then when I went to high school and into college, the sort of popular culture, I think, captured me, and I found myself less interested in my parents' politics and what they were up to, and I was more into playing football and hanging out with my friends, and the idea of doing political action didn't appeal to me so much. I still had the same values, I think, from my parents. They were liberals, and we really believed in equality, and civil rights issues were very much taught in my house, but doing something about it, not so much. And after 2 years in college, I failed out of school, and I went in VISTA, the Domestic Peace Corps, and I worked with migrant workers. And I failed out of school not because I was lazy or because I was stupid, but because I just had no direction. I didn't know, why was I in school? What was I trying to get out of this? What was my life supposed to be about? And I found a purpose in VISTA that really has guided my life for the rest of my life, that you can make a difference. I mean, I learned that from my parents early. You don't have a swimming pool, you can make a swimming pool. It doesn't, you don't have to, you know, be rich or have somebody else do it for you or something. And the VISTA experience working with Latino and African American migrant workers in Florida, I learned that you could change a neighborhood, a community. And the community that I worked in was African American community. One of them had no paved streets, no sewer system. And this is, you know, in the 1960s, no sewer system in a town. People were using buckets, and they didn't even have like outhouses all the time. And we changed that. I saw that in a very short period of time, that if you really get organized and work at it, you can change things and make it happen. So when I went back to school, I went back to Cornell, where I had failed out of school, and got back in English literature. It was the only major that would take me back. I had failed so many classes and everything else. But I got active in the anti-war movement and the student movement, and then into the farm workers movement when I came to California. And so the experience of being in a movement and seeing that you could actually make a difference and seeing stuff happen, to me, is key. I think the reason most people are not activists is because they're pretty skeptical that, you know, getting involved. If you're first coming into your political awareness and Donald Trump is the president of the United States, you're thinking, gosh, how can that guy still be there after what he did last week or the week before that or the week before that? And it doesn't feel like nothing's going to happen. What difference would it make if I voted? What difference would it make if I went to a demonstration? When in fact, my experience has been those demonstrations change things, and voting can make a difference. And there is a difference between a Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, even though you might not like Hillary Clinton for everything she stands for. So my life has been sort of learning that if you get organized, you work with other people, if you have patience with people, you can really develop the possibility of changing things. The world is not stuck the way it is, and you can make a difference. So that's how I got into activism. And I've been on a lot of different kinds of issues, and I have frustrations like everybody else. There's issues we haven't changed. I mean, Donald Trump is still our president. It's very frustrating. But particularly at the local level, it just seems to me that there's the possibility of working with people and actually transforming your community and having a sense of, this is where I live. I can make this place, not by myself, but with other people. We can make this the kind of place we want it to be, rather than just accepting the world's going to make it something. We're going to be like San Jose, or we're going to wake up like Southern California and Santa Cruz. My sense was, no, we don't have to accept that future. We can change it. So that's really how I got into activism, the sense that you can make this difference.
Right. Well, and music has always been a part of that, and this is a segue to say that you brought your guitars, and so to remember that the United Farm Workers Union had an amazing musical canon of beautiful songs they brought out, and people sang them, and it lifted their spirits, because it's actually quite discouraging sometimes in the middle of these battles where, you know, in their case, the police was beating on people, and there were people going to jail constantly. So
Right.
Music was an important part. I'm glad you brought some with you to share today in between our conversations. So.
Well, Rick and I agreed we would sing a couple songs. this is a song by Bob Dylan. It's called It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And any Dylan song could be about 12 or 15 different things, but I look at the song and I think about it being, it's somebody singing to America. And I thought about it particularly in the war in Vietnam, but even in the current situation now, that the American dream has kind of run out, and we really needed some new alternative to think about what's going to happen. So Rick and I are going to sing It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. You must now take what you need to think would last. But whatever you wish to keep, you better grab it fast. Yonder stands your orphan with his gun, crying like a fire in the sun. Look out, the saints are coming through, and it's all over now, baby blue. The highway is for gamblers, better use your sense, and take what you have gathered from coincidence. The empty-handed painter from your streets is drawing crazy patterns on your sheets. The sky too is folding under you, and it's all over now, baby blue. All your seasick sailors, they are rolling home. All your reindeer armies are all going home. The lover who has just walked out your door has taken all his blankets from your floor. The carpet too is moving under you, and it's all over now, baby blue. Leave your stepping stones behind, something calls for you. Forget the dead you left, they will not follow you. The vagabond who's rapping at your door is standing in the clothes that you once wore. Strike another match, go start anew, and it's all over now, baby blue. Oh, it's all over now, baby blue.
Yeah, Bob Dylan was such an important part of those early movements in the 60s.
I think that movement having culture in it, and it wasn't just about politics and seriousness and dourness. We had fun while we're trying to make these changes, and that's important too. You have to have a community. You have to live your life. It can't all be about, and someday in the future we'll all be happy or something. You got to find a way to make this work while you're living this life in a community.
That's so important. And so you both ended up in Santa Cruz. You were here a long time. You were here a long time. You ended up at one point on the opposite end of a pretty pitched battle about water. What could be more elemental than fighting about water? What did Mark Twain say? Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting about. So did you know each other before you got on opposite sides of an issue?
Not too much.
Not really. I've heard his name, but I didn't really know him.
Okay, so you both have passion for activism. You both end up in a town that's fairly liberal, progressive, and yet it's that kind of a bubble, and this war ended up not really being the typical, Iowa versus Santa Cruz values. It ended up being about how to get somewhere, not whether we needed water or not. So talk about both of your perspectives when you first found out each other was on opposite sides and how that felt, knowing what little you did about each other, and then how you got to know each other through that process.
Maybe I'll start. I had been persuaded that there really was no alternative for the city to have enough water to make it a comfortable, happy place to live than desal, and investigated a number of other alternatives. I'd started off as an opponent of desalination because of its energy intensity, and there are other problems with it too if you don't handle it right and stuff, putting saltwater plumes into the bay and things like that. And so I was not generally supportive, but then having exhausted so many other alternatives, was persuaded this was the only thing left that really would get us the water we needed. So I was behind it. I want to make this happen because I fully felt the community needed to address its water. And I wanted to do that for two reasons. One, just because we needed the water, it was the right thing to do. As a council member, I wanted to try and support that. But also, I was very concerned if the city council didn't deliver water to people, there'd be a right-wing reaction, and the progressive councils that we had been electing might get overturned by people saying, these people can't even make water come out of the tap, you know, and be a problem. So I didn't want to have a council that was incompetent to deliver a basic service that people depend upon. So I was pretty hell-bent to think that, you know, desal's got to happen, was ready to fight to the bitter end over it and, you know, fight all opponents. And anybody that didn't understand desal was, and again, I understood people that were against it. I understood the reasons they might be against it. And then I went about systematically trying to explain, well, here's how we can address that problem and this problem. And, you know, we can find a way to use solar energy for this so it won't be, you know, an energy-intensive issue so much. Or we can find a way to, like, make sure that we put the water back in the bay in a way that doesn't create a salt plume and kind of environmental problems. But that's where I was at when Rick started the movement, and let him say a little bit about what he got, how he entered into this.
So, you know, I was the latecomer. I mean, there was a consensus among the city council. I think that, you know, unanimous votes on expenditures for desalination, and ever since like 2004 or 5. And so I came into it around 2010, and you know, but my background, as I mentioned, I was, you know, riding my bicycle, pulling my trailer, and so like energy, it was on my mind. Plus, you know, and the clients that I would serve, you know, for trying to help them choose energy efficient lighting and stuff like that. That was the way that I was trying to live out my values, because I didn't have time for a lot else, right? So what the consensus view, even though it was a consensus, just rattled me, you know, because of the energy intensity of the plant. And so it was jarring in a way to be part of a community that was going in that direction. And so the question was, can there be other alternatives, you know? So we named it, our group, the desal alternatives, and not just, you know, stop the desal plant or something, because that was the question, because we recognized the problem. And so as it, you know, as it turned out, we reopened the subject of how we were going to solve our water issues, and that it was just momentum. It was like stopping a locomotive. You know, it takes a long time to stop a train, right? And to go in a different direction. And I think that our group, although I had intentions for it not to be polarizing, you know, I think our group only partially succeeded in having the kind of dialogue and debate that would be less likely to make it polarizing, because people just get excited, you know, they get passionate, and then they view, you know, the people that disagree as the enemy. You know, these are the people that are standing in the way of, you know, environmental sanity, right? And I mean, it becomes that us versus them. Which is
also, when you start a movement, you don't always control all the people that join you and what their views are and how they come to it and stuff. So whereas my perception is that Rick was always thinking, well, how will we get water that will be environmentally sound? Certainly people joined the desal alternatives group and movement and stuff whose view were like, you know, hey, we don't need any water, and like let people live somewhere else, and it's like not a problem, and we don't have to think about this issue. And or who had huge conspiracy theories, as if the city were going to make somehow the water director would make money on this personally or something, which was never the case. And so there was a lot of hostility that went way beyond anything that Rick was doing or that the group formally was taking these positions. But they had people out there who were like, you know, savaging the city staff as if they were somehow doing this for some corrupt reason, as opposed to perhaps, you know, not looking at the best alternatives or not pushing as far as they should.
And Mike, how did it feel
hard
to be over on the camp that was being painted as, you know, the guys who were holding back the activist agenda? So someone who has his whole life as an activist is now in the chair of being the man, you know,
it's
the
funny, like
establishment, and you got painted as, you know, the pro-development guy after many years of trying to slow growth. So you can't win here, right?
No, you have to like have a pretty thick skin to go in public life. I joined the Sierra Club when I was 12, okay? And, you know, when I was still active with my parents and doing political stuff, and I remember reading Rachel Carson's book in 1960, and you know, I've been an environmentalist all my life, and so I like to be painted as the guy that doesn't care about the environment. Oh, I don't care if the bay gets, you know, people tell me, oh, you don't care about the fish, you don't care about the ocean, the bay, or anything else like that. It's not an accurate picture of who I am, but that's where people go when you get into these kinds of fights. And of course, the people I was working with in city staff and the city council were thinking, these people from the outside, wow, they don't know what's going on. They're against something, but they don't know the science. They don't understand all the things we investigated. That, like, they didn't get into that. Well, that was part of Rick's job. You know, we did look at those things. We try and see, are there some alternatives that are actually meaningful? We eventually get to a place where we begin to investigate those options. I'll say it reached the point where it was clear that we could not get this desal plant through. We might succeed, but it was going to be so painful and so divisive to the community. And even if we won, it would be on a 49% basis or something. And we'd go forward with anger and to divide the progressive community in a way, because it was a progressive city council. It was like in favor of this desal plan. And that we would be divided over other issues as well that we need to be united about and try and make a difference in the world. So at some point started thinking, is there some way to start a dialogue here? Is there some way to figure out, is there some alternative look, if there's not, well, maybe Rick seems like a reasonable person. Maybe we can persuade him there isn't an alternative. This is the best we can do. Let's make this desal plant environmentally sound. Or maybe he's right. I haven't had that thought. Maybe there is an alternative that we thought didn't make sense 5 years ago, but now looking at it again in a different way, it could be done differently. So that opened up the possibility of having a conversation, I think.
So Rick, it sounds like there was a turning point where he was willing to actually allow that perhaps you had a point, and then it opened up the ability, is that true, to just really literally have the
It took
conversation?
a lot of work on his part to get me
Yeah,
there,
just to
believe
get
me.
there, yeah. I bet.
I mean, to me, the ideal political debate, or debate over a political issue, is without the judgment that your opponent is somehow not, doesn't have their values, doesn't have the same care. For example, we use the word care, right? That would be absent. There would be an assumption. Yes, my opponent cares. So it's just about how do we get there. And then we say, well, what's your way? Well, let me see. Like, well, how would that work? Well, I think that actually would detour us in that way. And, so then it becomes a kind of dispassionate discussion about consequences and avenues. And we just don't have a lot of experience with that kind of dialogue, right, politically. I mean, we just get so easily polarized. So I think what we did what our group did, the Desal Alternatives group, we walked through the steps of making, putting roadblocks, if you will, in the way of the desalination train. And then the city opened the process up and said, yes, we're going to step back from our commitment to desal and have a stakeholder committee that will convene and figure out what, and there was no prejudice going into that committee of what the outcome would be.
But it sounds like the way you went about it, it allowed them to come to the table with you, whereas if you had painted them, not, maybe some of your followers did, but most of the leaders of the anti-desal movement did not paint Mike and the rest of the council as having bad intent, and so that left the door open, right? Then they could talk to you, because if you had, there would be, even if they allowed you might have had a point, they wouldn't have come to the table as easily and readily. Not that it was easy.
I had a sense that, at least with Rick, and there were some others as well who had been against desalination, and that there was possibility of a dialogue there, that we were willing to talk some facts. First of all, do we need more water or don't we? I mean, that's a basic piece of information in which there was no agreement, no consensus about that.
Not
whatsoever.
an easy answer. It depends on how much more building you do.
How much water, what's our growth plan for the
Yeah.
city, and how much is, and even much more difficult, how much water will nature deliver to us in rains, which is totally, it seems like there's less and less of it all the time. We were in the, starting to look at some droughts that had happened recently, and just thinking, well, there must be, can we get there? Is it a possibility? And I started thinking, well, some of these people, we could have a conversation about that question. Let's start there. Because again, there were some opponents of the desalination thing whose idea was, we don't need any water. If we can solve this problem by making Santa Cruz so elite and so inaccessible to working people that we won't need more water. It'll be like Carmel or something. And I didn't get that perception from Rick, that he was willing to write off working people, or that this was only about making this an elite place where it didn't matter what the people that work in hotels need in the way of housing and water that would serve that or something. So that opened up the possibility of thinking this could work out. And one thing that changed for me when I came to Santa Cruz from my earlier anti-war politics was, in the anti-war stuff, it was very much protest, trying to stop it. I didn't know what the foreign policy should be exactly, but it shouldn't be this, and we should fight it and stop it. But when I got to Santa Cruz, I got much more interested in what can we do positively that actually will fix a problem. In other words, not just to protest, be against things, but how do you fix this problem? If the problem is not enough housing, it's not enough to have demonstrations, we want more housing, but where does housing come from? How do you make it? What does it need to make it function, and what does it happen? So I was much more interested in that kind of discussion, and I saw Rick as someone who was interested in that conversation. What can we do practically that actually will address this issue?
So in the final moments we have left, we have about 4 more minutes, talk about how you actually did talk to each other and actually become, much more well-acquainted and friendly with each other, and what lessons does that hold for people right now who are facing, big issues to small issues all over their communities?
Well, the cool thing was that Mike responded whenever I wanted to talk to him about something, because I wanted him to understand something about what I, was doing. Then he would say yes, and I didn't get that from everybody. I sent emails and phone calls and stuff, and people wouldn't meet with me. So, but Mike always did. Just didn't really feel threatened by me.
Well, you don't look super scary. Maybe you are, but.
So then
you invited me to your house for breakfast with you and your wife as well. That was an important moment.
That was before the whole thing.
That was an important moment in this thing and stuff, just to discover you as a person and someone who seemed like shared my values generally, and a nice person, and someone was comfortable talking to you. You weren't going to yell at me, and we weren't going to have a shouting match. And
it is. It's like how we're going to get over the us them is actually meeting and talking, and so and we need to recognize that we're kind of biologically wired for the us them reaction. So we actually need to be very proactive in reaching out and digging and wait a minute, I know they have the same needs that I do, Yeah.
And just to wrap it up and give you time to play your song, just some final thoughts on how the Water Commission benefited from your relationship that was now much more positive. Actually, just one word each, because I want to give you a chance to sing your song, and I'm getting the
I'll just
message.
say people should know that 14 people who crossed the complete political spectrum of Santa Cruz agreed. There should be a plaque where that meeting took place, agreed on this water solution and we agreed on it, that actually will serve this, we believe, serve the city's water needs into the future.
Well, thanks for the inspiration.
It actually worked out.
Thanks for the inspiring words.
Yeah,
I hope people take
in that
this
committee,
away.
Mike was I was pleased he was there, because it was like, he would say, no, I think what Rick's trying to say is, and then he'd paraphrase it, and everybody would get it. Oh, okay, is that it? So we're going to sing a little kind of a song for these times, because it's about what can happen in seemingly dark times. Now I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun.